In cultural anthropology, the study of different cultures around the world, and in history and the culture that we're in now, there's an idea of kinship. And put simply, kinship means who are your people? And it is very prevalent in the Bible, and it helps us understand a lot of what is in the Bible. But I want to focus particularly on how it helps us to understand uh, aspects of the New Testament and the ecclesia, the church, in the New Testament. So, kinship is the study of, it's who are your people? And in the United States, we're highly individualistic, and it doesn't matter quite as much in some aspects as it did to the people of the New Testament. We focus a lot on who our nuclear family is, and to a degree, that's the same as the New Testament. Who your father is played a big role in who you would be and what it would be like for you in society. But unlike us, the New Testament culture focused a lot more on nation, and then as a smaller group on your heritage, and then as a smaller group your family. So your nation, that is seen in the genealogies. We are drawing connections to uh, a father figure, a patriarch. And most of the time, that patriarch is Abraham, the father of faith, or it is Israel, uh, who defines the nation of Israel. So that patriarch is their kin, but a smaller group of kin, you've got tribes, and there were 12 tribes, well, 11 and two half tribes in the Old Testament, and people define themselves based on who their tribe is. And you see Paul appealing to this, that he is of the tribe of Benjamin. And if you know anything about the the tribes, you know that Benjamin is where Saul came from, and that's Paul's namesake before his name was changed. Um, the tribe of Benjamin, that was the little brother of the 12, and Benjamin and Judah were the two tribes that stayed together when the kingdom split. You can tell a lot about somebody's heritage by placing them in one of the tribes. This includes the sons of Aaron, or the tribe of Levi, which are priests. And you see that Jesus is connected to the priests. He's connected to the order of Melchizedek as well in Hebrews. So uh, there's a nation, and then there's a heritage, and then furthermore there is family. And you see, when Jesus was walking around, people were trying to define him by who his family was. And in Jesus' day, family reputation was everything. You see in Matthew 13, verse 55, people are asking, is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And you see here a big importance on family. If we know someone's family, we know them. Jesus was kind of acting apart from his family. He became an itinerant preacher instead of a carpenter, which was the expectation at the time, that you would go into the profession of your father. Now, there are three things I want to focus on in this study of kinship. One is that we have a new kinship in Jesus, and that what Jesus did was revolutionary in defining a new kind of kinship that transcended nation, heritage, and family. It became a new family. And then the second aspect of this is that we have kinship not just with each other in a new family, but we have kinship with God because of adoption into the family of God. And then there is a third aspect, which is how do we practically put this into practice? So we have a new kinship in Jesus, and we see this explicitly in Matthew 12:46 through 50. And it says, "While he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brothers stood outside, asking to speak to him. But he replied to the man who told him, 'Who is your mother, and who are my brothers?' And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother and sister and brother.'" And so we see that Jesus here is defining a new kind of kinship that doesn't rely on his family. This passage is often seen as Jesus kind of renouncing his family who's coming to collect him because they hear he's been teaching and they want to have a word with him. I've heard it preached that way before, and there might be an aspect of that, but more importantly is an idea that Jesus is now identifying his family as someone other than his blood relatives. It is a brotherhood of believers, as seen in 1 Peter 2:17, where it says, "Love the brotherhood." It is a new family, and you see this explicitly as Jesus connects his family and his disciple in John 19:26 and 27. It says, "When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, 'Woman, behold your son.' Then he said to the disciple, 'Behold your mother.' And from that hour the disciple took her to his home." This is both the physical telling John to take care of his mother, which was the expected role at the time for a son of a widowed mother. The man in the house was to take care of the widow of Mary in this case, and so there's both the physical material understanding of this verse, which is to say that John took Mary under his care. And then there is also a spiritual aspect of this about kinship, that kinship is defined in faith, that there's a family of believers. Now, the second aspect of this, I think, is rich in how we understand the gospel. We think so much about justification, which is an important doctrine, but something that the Reformers loved to talk about, and especially the Puritans, was adoption. Not just justification, but adoption. Justification is the idea that we're made right before God, and there is kinship language in the next step, which is that we're adopted into the family of God. And so we see this in first. We see this in Colossians 1, starting in verse 15. It's a hymn, and it says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him." There is the justification, holy and blameless before him. "If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope and the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister." So we see both justification and we see kinship language. First of all, the kinship language comes about at the second half of 15, 1:15 here. It says, "the firstborn of all creation." Now, you may have had someone come to your door before and say that the firstborn of all creation means that God created Jesus first. This does not line up with historic Christianity, but it is, unfortunately, a heresy that is still believed today by the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they say that Jesus was the first and greatest creation. And that's what's meant by firstborn. Not only does this not teach that Jesus was a creation, but it teaches so much more and such better news than that Jesus was a creation. Instead of being a creation, firstborn means that he's the first of many siblings in the family of God. And we see this, that we are being reconciled by Christ's body, which was given in death, and we are being restored, made blameless before God. So Christ has preeminence because he is the firstborn. Specifically what this means is that Christ is bringing us in as his own brothers. So we get to be adopted into the family of God. Even more than that, we see kinship language in who is close to God and who is far from God. In chapter 21, "And you who were once alienated and hostile in mind." Alienated, meaning not within the fold, not part of God's kin. We were a different family entirely. But now we are reconciled, verse 22. Reconciled in his body of flesh by his death. So we are reconciled into the kinship of God. And that is such good news. It's exciting to think that we might be part of God's family. Not only are we part of God's family, and now we are brothers with Christ, we get the same inheritance as him in kinship. It also means that God cares for us as if we or his own son. And we see this in John 1:1, that to those who believe, he gives the right to become children of God. And so God doesn't love us as creatures anymore. God loves us as his own children. Of course, this is an oversimplification because God is not human and doesn't love us as human parents love their human children. But it's a metaphor, and the metaphor is pointing to something even stronger. Jesus tells us that if you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your parents, good gifts to your children, how much more does God know how to give good gifts to his children? And so, even though it's not an exact parallel with God really being our parents in the same way, what it points to is an even stronger case. God cares for us as he cares for his own kin. We see this in passages like casting all your cares on him because he cares for you. That is good news, and it only makes sense because we understand that we are adopted into this same family. Now, another part of this dimension is that we are now tasked with caring for our own family. This has some to do with how we order our households, with men being the head as Christ is the head of the church, and with women submitting as the church submits to Christ. This kinship language has a lot to say about how we operate with our real material kin, and that extends to children. Children obeying parents, and parents, especially fathers, not provoking your children in wrath, not provoking your children to anger, not treating them harshly. And it also a part of a household that is not seen as much today, but was very much a part of the reality of first century Christianity and first century households were slaves. And we see that there is a language of being God's servant. Paul describes himself as a servant of Jesus Christ on many occasions. But we also see that in Ephesians and in Colossians and in 1 Peter, that slaves are told to serve their masters as they would serve the Lord. And this is a very hard passage to understand in a world where we have abolished slavery, and for good reason. We have abolished slavery, and so we don't understand this in the same way. And many people will see a passage dealing with slavery in the New Testament as a challenge to their faith. Understanding it in the terms of kinship really makes good use of this worldview, and it explains a lot more about why slavery wasn't just abolished. First of all, it was a part of the world, and second, it does in how slaves are communicated to in the epistles. It teaches us something about how we are to relate to one another. More profoundly is the idea that slaves can be brothers to their masters, that they are on the same a level surface when it comes to the gospel. This idea of kinship in the gospel, this new family, tells us that women are co-heirs of the glory of Christ in 1 Peter 2. It also tells us that slaves are also brothers, and we see this in Philemon as well as in Ephesians, Colossians, and 1 Peter. This is profound. So with all of these earthly kinship structures still in place, we can have a kinship structure that supersedes them and gives glory to people who are not typically glorified in the material world. So it is good news for so many reasons. It gives us a new family, which may replace a family that has been nothing but a source of hardship and heartbreak. It gives dignity to women, and it gives dignity to slaves. In fact, Christianity was often criticized as being the religion of slaves and women, and I see that as a huge strength of the Christian message, that the kinship of God puts everybody on equal footing. Now, we also see in 1 Corinthians 5 some abuses of this kinship and some ways in which the earthly structures need to conform to the heavenly order that's being given. When believers were bringing each other to court to settle disputes that should have been settled inside of the church, in their own kin. And we see Paul talking about we shouldn't let outsiders judge us, but we will judge the angels. And this is now ordering the family units, ordering the society after the pattern of the gospel. We see John in both John and in 1 John talking about how we ought to love one another. And we see Peter in 1 Peter saying to love the brotherhood. And this is in the context of honoring the emperor, but there's a specific and special way that we ought to love the brotherhood. Now, as an activity, here I want to propose a thought experiment. I want you to consider who it was that evangelized to you, who it was that told you about the good news and really brought you into the fold, brought you into the kinship of God. I want you to consider and think specifically about this kinship language. How did your relationship with them deepen when they welcomed you into the fold? What are the ways in which their actions toward you were very familial? And how did you feel a sense of growing together into family with them as you became a believer? Now, with all of those in mind, those different ways in which you deepen in your kinship with that person, I want you to think about how you can apply some of that and maybe use kinship as a way to evangelize others. I want you to consider ways that you can show kinship with someone as a means of evangelism. What would you do for a family member to show your love toward them? And how can that be used to share the gospel in a uniquely familiar way? This may be something you ponder for a while. Uh, you don't have to have a specific answer, but I hope that as you're pondering this, that you're at least thinking more of the family of God as a real family. Now, these are some questions I want to leave you with as I close the study here, but how does the concept of family illuminate the gospel message? In other words, what specifically about kinship language and family makes the gospel message resonate in a way that it didn't before? The second question is, does seeing God as a real father change your expectations when you are praying? Think specifically about Peter's words that you can cast your cares on him because he cares for you. Does seeing God as a father change your expectation when you are praying? And lastly, how can we better how can we be better family to our new kin in Christ? So thank you for being with me on this study, and I hope that this has given you some insights into the gospel in light of kinship.